So afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Listen, delighted to have Julie Yufe here with us. Julie, as some of you know, runs vodka and rum for Diageo. What an enviable task, especially at Cannes, isn't it? It really is. Prior to that, she was at Diageo for nearly 10 years. Recently moved from Europe, where she's been for 5 years, back to the US. And I think we're going to get some phenomenal insights. We're going to try and cover three things. Those who know Julie will know that she's got an incredible career. So we're going to talk about that to start off with. I think there's a lot to learn. Secondly, we're going to talk about alcohol, because we all know it's dear to our hearts, I'm sure. And third, we're going to talk about good old Cannes, and maybe alcohol as well, of course. So let's kick off, Julie. Do you want to share a little bit about your career journey and how you got to this point?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Brand Innovators, for having me. Thank you for everyone who's trying to hear in the back. I know it's a little windy, competing with the wind, the sun, the sand. But thank you, Clive. So I started my career actually in finance way back in the day, and then quickly realized that I was much more fascinated by people and what they buy and why they buy it and culture, and very quickly found my way into marketing. So I grew up in Unilever, which many of you may know is a kind of school of marketing, working on everything from hair care, skin care, beverages. I had target audiences of young boys, menopausal women, everything in between, and was fortunate enough to make the leap to brands of even bigger scale in alcoholic beverages. So spent 10 years on brand and innovation globally and locally at AB InBev, and then was stretched into a GM role. And in that role was my first real opportunity to go beyond the marketing to functions that I had never really led before, had never worked in before, but leading leaders in those functions that are things I never knew how to do. So it was a very big leadership stretch. It was very exciting. And I would say the big thing I took away from that was the multi-stakeholder, the importance of multiple stakeholders in the building of brands. So for anyone here who's a brand builder, right, it's not just the consumer or the customer, but the consumer and the customer and the supplier and the small farm stakeholders who are making the ingredients that go into your product and the communities in which you operate, and everyone who in any way, shape, or form touches your brand can be impacted. And so you have to be able to think across that model. So it was very, very growing, challenging, exciting. And now I'm very lucky to say that I am back in the US, where I call home, and working on amazing brands that have long, long legacies of inclusiveness, long legacies of delighting consumers, and I'm at Diageo in very, very fast-moving categories of rum and vodka.
And if you take the three main companies, you know, Unilever, ABI, I know you've worked for other companies. If you take Unilever, ABI, and Diageo, you know, when we wake up in the morning, we all have a choice about the companies we want to work for, and probably even more so than ever. Why have you chosen those companies specifically?
So since you like threes, I thought I would go with threes. So Unilever, because it was just an amazing place to learn and grow. Amazing. Hopefully you guys can hear me. If you can't hear me, raise your hands. Okay. AB InBev, because of just scale, ambition, just an impressive approach, voraciousness for doing things differently, stretching, growing, and being ambitious. And I think that that's something that you really have to learn and build in order to make huge, huge impact in the world. And Diageo, I cannot say enough beautiful things. I'll start with the purpose. So celebrating life every day, everywhere. You can't think of anything more joyful, energizing, exciting to do in the morning when you get up than to celebrate the people and who make that happen. Secondly, the leadership. So Diageo's leadership has made a commitment to 50% women leadership by 2030, 45% diverse leadership by 2030. Already, we have a woman as CEO, CHRO, CMO, CFO. Our North American president is a woman. Our European president is a woman. I can go on and on and on and on. Like 50% of the board is women. And I'm using these as proof points of just a commitment to walk the talk when it comes to inclusivity, diversity, all throughout. And this is before we've even talked about brands. So I think it says a lot for the company you keep, and I want to be with people who do what they say they're going to do.
Hear, hear.
And this is the Diageo team right here.
Of course, the loud Diageo team at the front. Listen, Diageo sounds like a great business. When you take a risk, because when you've worked for a company for 10 years, you can become maybe comfortable. So it was a big decision, A, to move to Diageo, which sounds like there's some unbelievable reasons why, but also to move from Europe back to the US, home. Do you want to talk more about, the balance of the 10-year and, the courage to make that choice?
So I loved my time working and living in Europe. I think it was really, really growing and stretching, both personally and professionally. As someone who spent a lot of time in New York, having to adapt to a different pace was challenging for me. I got to work in a really, really, with a broad group of people who, everyone spoke 4 languages. It was amazing. Coming back to the US, I think, is just a dream of doing things big, right? I want to make an impact. And so if you're going to do something on a stage, the stage should be very big, in my view. It takes just as much energy to do small things as big. So for me, it was like, let's find the biggest stage and dance on it. And I think that that's what working in the US does. We have millions of consumers, people who buy our brands. Some of our brands touch more people's lives every day than categories do in other countries in a year, in multiple years. And so that's a tremendous, tremendous honor to be part of.
And as you said, US is big. The scale, there's over $1 trillion spent on advertising every year globally. 30% of ad spend is in the US. Only 5% of the global population is in the US. What's the big difference, having your experience between Europe and, apart from scale, between Europe and the US, do you think, especially from a marketer's perspective?
To be honest, I fundamentally believe people are more similar than they are different. Right? I've worked in many global roles where, we spent a lot of time mapping the differences between our markets and what makes them different. But ultimately, the connective tissue is very, very consistent. So I don't necessarily think there's a dramatic difference between Europe and the US. But I do think, you have to be attentive to the climate in which you operate, to the specific consumer groups you talk to, and be sensitive to the things that motivate and drive them. And I feel very lucky to be on brands that have wonderful consumers who's, are very open to the entire journey that we take, from seed to sip, so we say, or grain to glass, as we try and, leave a very positive mark in the world.
And let's talk about your role now. Let's talk about, so what have you tried to do? Going to a new company, new role, how did you set yourself up for success, sort of to start off with, from the brand's perspective? Because, you can't go riding in there saying you know it all and, all this sort of stuff. So how have you set yourself up in the first 6 months?
I'm still setting myself up. I see people here from my team that I just met last night. So I think it's a process, but I feel very fortunate to have amazing colleagues, not just because they're sitting right here in the front row, and just learning, right? Understand the market, speak to the people through the entire, I'll say, supply chain, right? That makes the machine happen, the people who make the products, the people who sell the products, the people who distribute our products, to understand their challenges. And again, going back to this point of multiple stakeholders in the, that make it happen, trying to understand all facets of the brands so that when it comes to, the great gift that is leading these brands into the future, I'm able to really be attentive to all the people who make that promise sustainable.
And let's talk about the stakeholders and talk about consumers for a minute. So the world has become far more complex from a media perspective, from a communication perspective, from a sensitivity perspective. How, you've worked in alcohol, you love alcohol. How do you start to think about communicating with consumers in this modern world where there's so much sensitivity to a certain extent that has to be, completely honored and observed?
Well, since we're at Cannes, I think a big buzzword always is authenticity. So we have to talk about being authentic and true to who we are. And again, I'll go back to the theme I said earlier, right? It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And I'll use an example, right? Where we are thinking about not just diversity in our halls, but who we contract with in front and behind the camera when it comes to building advertising. We talk about, where we source our ingredients. So we've recently reformulated Captain Morgan, and where the new Madagascar vanilla comes from is very important. We look at all facets of this supply chain and think about how we can really practice what we preach all the way along through. And it's not perfect, but that leads to consistency, it leads to authenticity, and it allows us to be a force for good.
How much do you think consumers care? Listen, when I'm in a bar, or my son more likely is in a bar who's 23, and he's asking for a Smirnoff, of course. How much does he really?
Good choice.
How much does he really care about that?
I think he cares deeply. He may not know it in that moment, but it's the collective, right? It's why we build brands for the long term. It's why we sweat all these little details. We call it creativity with precision, right? It's about making sure that every single detail holds up so that in the long term, you're building a consistent story. It's like living a life in a way, right? You want to live a great, storied, consistent life as a person.
Yeah, because I suppose those brands become, we sometimes forget those brands are a part of our life ultimately.
Absolutely. And people care deeply. I mean, there's brilliant examples in the last 5 years of how brand love has been fomented or destroyed, unfortunately, by the choices we make. So we have to sweat the details.
So listen, one of the things we spoke about earlier was Society 2030, which is a massive drive within Diageo, which is D&I, consumer focused, sustainability focused. Just want to touch on that because I think it's a strong ambition that the company has and a vision which feels like is part of the reason you're at the company in the first place.
It is. I cannot say I'm the world's best expert at this. I'm learning. I'm in a course actually that the company has funded to make sure that we do become sustainability experts. At Oxford, it's very intense. There are essays. It's a big time commitment, but it's an investment in us as an organization and as the organization's leaders to ensure that we are really, building a society for the future. And with that comes an understanding, again, of the agricultural inputs, the production inputs, how we, transport materials. All these details have a big impact and are part of the 2030 goals because we recognize that we are part of a big ecosystem. And in order to impact that sustainably, you need to be able to understand all the inputs together.
And I suppose, we heard it a few years ago, and I think it's a hot topic that I don't think people are talking about enough at the moment, which is trust. If you think about trust in the world, trust of our politicians, trust of our banks, and trust of our brands. Do you want to touch on that? Because that sort of feeds into that as well, this Society 2030, because it's about ultimately being a trusted brand.
It is about being a trusted brand, and I also think it's about, there's a talent piece to this too, right? Attracting the type of individuals that you want to work with. waking up in the morning proud of what you do, proud of the impact you're having in the world. And I think, so it's even beyond the brand, right? It's about your purpose. And we talk a lot about purpose at Diageo, and I think if you're going to celebrate life every day, everywhere, you have to be doing that all the way through the ladder.
And listen, Diageo has 27,000 employees, not that I looked it up, of course. The challenge with any company is how do you get everyone, rowing in the same direction around that sense of purpose? How are you doing that with your team?
I have bought in, obviously, right? I've been there for
not
even 6 months yet. So I think it's about a very clear goal or a big dream, BHAG as we call it at Diageo, setting targets against those. So there are very clear, like I mentioned before, on DE&I targets, and investing where we say we're going to invest. So the people, the technical capabilities to make it happen in the brands. The choices we're making are not always the inexpensive ones, right? But we're taking them because it's going to enable us to deliver on our dreams.
Your passion for your new role is definitely palpable. It really is. And I think it's testament to the purpose that the company has that they managed to attract you in the first place. It really is. It's terrific. So listen, let's switch the conversation up. Let's talk about Cannes. You're coming this year with a very different perspective. You're coming as an American, not a European, even though you're American, because you're in Europe for the last 5 years.
I do sound European, don't I?
I think you sound, very European. Exactly. What's the difference? What's the difference, do you think, coming here as an American versus a European? And it feels like over the last few years, Cannes has become very American, actually, partly because, most of the brands, or a lot of the big brands are American to start off with, I suppose. But what's the big difference?
So it's not tremendously different. However, I will say because of my remit, I'm more attentive to some things that in the past when I had a European hat on, I had slightly different priorities because not all the different platforms were accessible to me, or, there were brands that were operating in my countries that, don't touch me now. So it's very similar in many, many, many ways. I think there's also a personal dimension where, when I came as a European, I was really excited to see all my American friends. And now I'm really excited to see all my European friends who I haven't been around in months and months and months. So, but overall, it's I would say, relatively similar experience. The themes change every year. There's always something hot and new. Creativity should be celebrated, and we love it and want to enjoy and learn as much as possible. And someone always makes a joke, so I'll do it now, about rosé.
You can't get enough, can you? And what do you think on the themes? What are you picking up as the sort of main themes within Cannes this year?
Sure. I mean, there's everyone's, the projected winning theme of the day, which was going to be AI. I'm really excited by what I've been seeing in DE&I, and particularly inclusive design. So I've had some very good conversations about, design, not just at a structural level, but making sure to be inclusive of neurodiverse individuals. There's several different talks on that today. Sustainability, again, continues to be high on the list. And what I really appreciated yesterday, I was in the Palais, and I heard several times there and outside, was a recommitment back to the fundamentals of marketing. So brilliant basics, the foundational work that maybe isn't always the sexiest, but then builds the longevity of a brand. I really like that. So it's a little bit, yin-yang, new and old, coming together in service to brands that stand the test of time.
And listen, you're high on, pop culture, creativity, and innovation. This, Cannes was really the creative conference, and it's sort of, it's morphed into lots of other things, if you think about it. It's still creative, but it's creative around lots of other pieces of advertising and media. Do you think that creative needs to be put even more front and center here? Do you think it's lost some of that creativity and the pureness of creativity?
No, because I think, I don't believe Cannes has lost its creativity. I think inspiration, it sounds a little silly, but like inspiration comes from everywhere. And it's the confluence of the things that matter to people today and the enablers of those, like technology, that I think create beautiful, beautiful, experiences and unlock our own creativity and our power to create. So, no, I feel it's more creative than ever before, dare I say.
And what advice would you give anyone here to optimize their Cannes experience? Apart from drink Smirnoff, of course.
Obviously. Your experience is best with Smirnoff or Captain Morgan. Do so responsibly, please. And wear comfy shoes. Come prepared, be open, be surprised by who you meet, and have a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Okay. And listen, let's talk about the future. Let's talk about hopes. What do you, if you had a magic wand, what would, from a marketing perspective maybe, what would you wish for?
I would wish that the way we dream it up in our mind is exactly how it comes to life in every store in America.
What does that mean?
That means that there's never an imperfect execution. An idea is always perfectly understood by every consumer, that we reach exactly our target audience when we want to reach them. The dream is exactly as executed. We all know it's not. It can't be. So we have to plan for all the scenarios. But you asked me if I had a dream of perfect marketing, it would be that everything that we want to reach, everyone that we want to reach, does exactly as conceived.
Yeah, I think that's utopia. That's utopia, isn't it, really?
Well, you asked about utopia.
Absolutely. So listen, should we, I know you don't want to take questions, but I think you're doing an amazing job. So I think
we can take some questions.
I think it'd be great to open it up, if we can, for questions, if there are any in the audience, please.
Hi, Julie. My name's Brett Wachter. I'm with IBM Consulting, handling marketing services.
You might need to speak up a little because the wind is blowing. It's hard to hear you.
All right. I'll swallow the microphone. How's that? Brett Wachter. I'm with IBM Consulting, handling marketing services. And my question's about how it is that you go about scaling sort of the insightful execution of your marketing communications globally. Yesterday on this stage, Liz Caselli-Michael from Nestle was here talking about the social campaigns that they execute related to sustainability and messaging around some of what it is that you shared today. In 180 different markets globally, and having to be able to do so with messages that resonated within Cameroon, right? Within all of the local markets where Nestle sources, where Nestle operates, so on and so forth. And I felt like the complexity of that challenge is one that's huge, because you actually have to be able to tailor it to be meaningful with large-scale messages around sustainability, around diversity and inclusion, so on and so forth, that have different levels of resonance within different markets. And so I'm wondering how it is that you and the Diageo team support that kind of insights delivery so that the messaging can be tailored effectively at that level.
So I will disclaim this by saying I am not an insights expert, nor have I been in Diageo very, very long. So I will talk about my previous experience in global work that I've done. And again, I think it comes back to my point from earlier that I think people are fundamentally more similar than different. Obviously, when learning about your consumers, we need to find insights that resonate and resonate on a human level, and therefore can make sense to humans irrespective of what market they are in. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to be communicating that. So the work that I have done on a global level has always been a collaboration across teams. There are great ideas that bubble up from local insights. There are great ideas that get validated in one market and may travel. Every place does it differently and maybe differently on different brands. But I do think it's important to be listening to the consumer, make sure that what you're saying you can back up, right? Walking the walk again. and that it is something that, is within your remit to deliver as a brand promise.
Another question.
Tim's going to give a tough one, I see over there.
G'day, Julie. How are you going? My name's Jessie. I lead our global restricted verticals at Uber, so alcohol on the Uber platform. I love the message and the way that you said it with such exuberance. I wrote it down, celebrating life every day and everywhere. I can't think of anything more spirited and frankly meaningful in a conversation that we're having. But I heard a statistic earlier today at another panel that to me really stuck, and that was that 78% of consumers uncover things that attract them and make them loyal after their first purchase. And the argument was that the funnel has collapsed and that fundamentally advocacy becomes just as important as purchase, and purpose has to be built into action, in particular belief-driven action. You talked about sort of loosely this allegory of the 23-year-old son ordering Smirnoff, presumably at a joyous occasion at a club or a bar, but that the meaning or action behind that would subconsciously matter. I'd just love to hear a little bit more from your perspective about why and how you are trying to weave that twin message of like social purpose in with the joy and spirit and exuberance of the brand and the experience of consuming alcohol.
Sure. I mean, every brand obviously has its own purpose, right? And so what fits one brand doesn't fit another. I love what you were saying because I agree wholeheartedly. And in the case of Smirnoff, it is a brand that since 1864 has been about inclusivity. And so everything we do on Smirnoff speaks to that. Whether it's, again, the way we produce what we produce, whether it's, the missions that we take as a brand and the statements we take as a brand. And again, I think there is nothing more joyous than the joy of inclusivity and being together and being able to celebrate together. So to me, that's just one version. Obviously, we have a large portfolio, and each brand treats it differently. Not experienced enough in Diageo yet to speak to all the brands, but at least on mine, what gets me excited in the morning is the joy of celebrating people together.
So I think we have time for one last question. So we go here or here? Your choice.
This is going to be the one that gets me.
Thank you. Tom Ellis from Brand Genetics. Julie, we've had the pleasure of working together. You've worked a long time in beer. You're now working in spirits. What do you see as the biggest difference between building great beer brands and great spirits brands?
So this may not be the popular answer, but I don't see much difference because I think building a brand, whether it's spirits, beauty, healthcare, beer, skincare, tea. I worked with Tom on tea back in the day. It's the fundamentals that are very similar. It's about talking to people in ways that matter to them, being able to impact them every day. And so there might be different tactics. There might be different issues around it and challenges, but genuinely, I think the brand building fundamentals are the same.
I think the hangover is slightly different too, actually. But should we take this
Yeah,
last question? This over here. Great, thank you.
Hi, Julie. I'm Kim Purse. I work at Space Perspective. We're a carbon neutral human spaceflight company, and I wondered, when you talk about going back to basics, in addition to AI, can you talk a little bit about sort of a self-serving question, but new frontiers of marketing, new ways to reach people, new ways for creative inspiration?
Oh my goodness, this could be the entire week of Cannes. I think that's the whole point. Where to begin? I think that there's obviously, services that can be new ways to reach people. There's messages and causes that can be new ways to reach people. I don't know if I'm actually answering your question, but I'll keep going with it because we're going to be pulled off the stage. And I think that speaking to people's passions is very, very important. Just like the question you asked me about your son, I think the brands that stand the test of time are those that are consistent, that are meaningful, and that build that relationship over time because they do speak to fundamental human truths.
So, Julie, that was terrific. It really was. Just want to thank you,
Thank you.
so much.
Thanks for having
I
me.
thought you were amazing. She really was. Give her a round of applause. Thanks,
Thank you.
Julie. Great job.